history and social studies standards are in the works, and there is a set of national health and sex standards. We have not agreed to adopt any of these, and we don't have to. We're not committed to that yet. But believe me, the federal government will get those in exactly the way they got these in. They'll dangle the money. The kids in charter schools will have to take Common Core tests, therefore they'll essentially have to do that. The SAT is supposedly being aligned to Common Core. There's some dispute and uncertainty about how that's all going to happen. But because they pushed it back for a year, but that's the way they're trying to bully other homeschool students and private schools into going with Common Core, because they say, well, the SAT is going to be aligned. And Senator Miller said in our debate, he said, look, the SAT is going to be aligned, so you're going to have to do Common Core. You may not like it, but you're going to have to do it. And I thought, well, no, we don't have to do it. We are free-born American citizens. We'll do what we want to do, and we're not going to follow testing companies off a cliff. So I will close this by just reading a quotation from you. One of the groups that developed the standards is Achieve Inc. It's an arm of, it started out as an arm of the NGA in Washington. And the president is a man named Michael Cohen, who's been a progressive educator for way back. And he testified before a committee in New York in October, and this is what he said. The full effects of the Common Core won't be seen until an entire cohort of students from kindergarten through high school graduation has been effectively exposed to Common Core teaching. So that's 13 years. So it's going to take 13 years for us to see if this experiment works. That's what they're doing with our kids. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. We appreciate it. I think she put like 5 pounds of flour in a 10 pounds of flour in a 5-pound bag. It's a lot of information. Maybe I need some kind of standard so I can't get 5 and 10 right now. All right. Hillsdale College. We were told much more earlier today that I remember hearing Paul Harvey talk about Hillsdale College. I've never been there. I know what I hear, and I like what I hear, and certainly like what we heard this morning, as somebody who can explain certain things when it comes to Common Core. So let's welcome to our community Dr. Terrence Moore.
All right, how are y'all doing? All right, thanks for coming out. In addition to being a professor, sometimes when you hear the word professor, you think ivory tower, this guy's going to have very arcane concerns. But before becoming a professor, I actually ran a K-12 charter school in Colorado for 7 years, which was one of the better charter schools in the state. And 2 years in a row, it was ranked the best high school in the state. And the reason I say that is because I've had experience in a K-12 school. I know what first graders can learn and what they can't learn, what they ought to learn. And I know what seniors in high school want and demand and when they actually flourish. And I will tell you that the Common Core, particularly the English standards, which is what I'm going to talk about, are the very opposite of what constitutes a great education. And the charter schools that I work with, because now at Hillsdale I help set up charter schools around the country, and there is a classical charter school in Savannah right now that's one that we work with. And we hope to have one in Atlanta next year. And the things that we're doing in those schools that parents are demanding are the very opposite of what the Common Core is demanding. And that's, I don't think it's ironic, I think it's purposeful, because at the very moment when school choice efforts are starting to work around the country, and including in Georgia, the Common Core is trying to nationalize and standardize everything so that we can't see what really works in education, and we can't see that experiment. Let me start by just saying the phrase itself, and Mrs. Robbins did a great job of going through some of the faulty language of the Common Core. But the term itself, Common Core, is an outright lie. A Common Core has meant for a very long time a set of common books that everybody reads in common that are the core, the heart of the matter. And so when I went to university, I went to a university that prided itself on having a Common Core. We called it the Common Chore. But what it meant is everybody in college read the same books. We all started out in our social science class reading Adam Smith's A Wealth of Nations. And therefore we could all have a common conversation about that book. Well, the Common Core doesn't do that at all. If the Common Core did something like that, there wouldn't be all the confusion there is out in the world right now about, well, what is it? Is it a set of standards? Is it a curriculum or what? We would know that the students are reading Shakespeare. or that they're reading Dante or what have you, and we could be talking about those books. But in fact, not only is the Common Core so-called, not only is part of its purpose to confuse people, but in fact it's to take the Common Core out of the schools to the extent that it still remains, and it's especially the attempt to replace the great stories of our tradition, both the stories that you learn in literature, the fictional stories, and the great American story, the American narrative of people living, pursuing happiness freely under the rule of law. It's trying to deprive young people of both of those things, and to do so by using a lot of technical jargon that they think that we're going to adopt. So what I want to do tonight is to try to translate this for you and just work through the documents to take all this confusing eduspeak and boil it down to what it really amounts to and see whether this is a thing that anybody in this country wants to adopt, particularly the folks in Georgia. Let me start out by saying the first thing that you always hear is this phrase, college and career readiness. This is the other thing that the Common Core is called, college and career readiness. When did that become the aim of education? It wasn't until a couple of years ago that I heard that. I've been in the education field for a long time, and college and career readiness was not the aim of education. Did the founding fathers who started schools and who were very well educated, did they set up standards for college and career readiness? The other thing that goes hand in hand with that is this business about a 21st century global economy. If we don't adopt these college and career readiness standards, we're not going to be ready for the 21st century global economy, which is going to eat us alive. The scariest thing in the world. How many of you grew up in the 20th century? Well, there were 2 world wars, there was a Cold War, there was a lot of competition coming from foreign countries, and America did well, as long as it stood to the principles of self-government and freedom under the rule of law. So the idea that there's this new world out there that makes us completely change what education is, that's a trick. Don't you understand that if we're so frightened of this new world, then we'll do anything, and we'll pay anything to change education completely, though there's no track record for this, and there's no tradition of this ever working. The fact of the matter is, this country has always been a part of a global economy. And the founding fathers who created this nation did not then also create schools and colleges that prepared students for an 18th century global economy. They said, you need to read the classics. You need to read great things, because we're trying to train human beings and citizens. Those are the aims of education. When parents send their children to school, what do they want them to be? They want them to learn things, they want them to have knowledge, and they want them to be good human beings. What have the traditional aims of education always been? And you can tell this by the mottos of the universities and colleges you went to. Truth, virtue, beauty. Those are the aims of education. If you start out with your aims of education being college and career readiness, what goes away? Well, where does art fit into college and career readiness? Where does music fit into college and career readiness? How many people become professional artists? Not too many. And the truth is, and you can ask your local schools this, art and music are dying a slow death in the public schools. In most elementary schools, art meets once every 2 weeks, if that, and music maybe once a week. And you say, so what? You know, this is the world of computers and all the rest of it. Well, let me ask you this. What disciplines of learning speak to the human soul? Art, music, and after that, literature. Poetry, fiction, novels. Those are the things that go away in the Common Core. And the Common Core, they'll tell you that that's not happening, but all you've got to do is turn to the second page of the introduction to the Common Core English Standards, and they tell you that they were replacing literary texts, that is, classics of literature, with what they call informational texts. And they tell you they're going to do that, and by the time that you get to be a senior in high school, you're going to be reading 70% of these so-called informational texts. Is that a good thing? Well, first of all, we'll look at what the informational texts are. But just the audacity of making these statements is mind-boggling. For example, in these core documents, they use phrases such as what it means to be a literate person in the 21st century. Did literacy change with Y2K? How many of y'all learned how to read and write in the 20th century? Did you automatically become illiterate in the year 2000? The answer is no. But That shows you the audacity of the folks who are making these standards. They think that literacy in this century is somehow totally different from literacy in the previous century. And they think computers, therefore, have to be drug into the classroom. The students need to sit behind computers most of the time. Well, let me tell you something. A lot of y'all have kids. I have kids. Tell me if this is not the case. Are computers not diminishing literacy in this country? Our children are sending high-tech smoke signals to each other in 3-letter codes, such as OMG and TMI. I know a second-grade teacher who overheard a kindergartner the other day using the expression WTF. She didn't know what it meant, but she was using it because she had heard it. WTF indeed. Because that's what's happening with this idea of this 21st century literacy that computers are going to do our thinking for us. That's what it gets us. It gets us 21st century illiteracy. It's not my cell phone, so I'm not embarrassed. Okay, so at any rate, let's go through a few of these things. So you go through the introduction and you find these illiberal means of education, which I'm suggesting. Then you get to the standards. We're told this is not a curriculum, it's a set of standards, and these are high-level standards, they're rigorous standards. Has anybody tried to read these standards? They're almost, you have. My heart goes out to you. Did you make any sense of them? Did you make heads or tails of them? They are written in eduspeak that an ordinary citizen cannot understand and is not meant to understand. And you're even so, you've been trained in it, and you still can't make sense of them. Here's what the standards are. They're a set of failed pedagogical methods of education, such as group work and things like that. A lot of questionable, progressive political agenda items, such as diversity in the classroom. Every time the students break into groups, they have to be diverse groups, not just groups, but diverse groups. So I don't know if that means you have to go out and find all the kids who are of a certain race or certain socioeconomic background, but you have to have diverse groups. And a set of common sense observations that are written in such a way that you may think that they're really great, but it may just be the student has to raise his hand. And yet they say it in such a way that it seems like an epic event. I want to give you an example of a Common Core standard. This comes from page 11 of the Common Core standards. It's standard RL 2.9, which means Reading Standards for Literature, 2nd grade, standard 9. And it says this: by the end of the year, read and comprehend literature, including stories and poetry, in the grades 2 through 3 complexity band proficiently, with scaffolding as needed at the high end of the range. Wow! The poetry of state standards. So, what does that mean? I'm going to translate it for you. No, I mean, most people wouldn't want to ask because they don't want to feel like they just aren't in on the joke. By the end of the year, by the end of the 2nd grade year, read and comprehend literature. Fair enough. Including stories and poetry. Yes, come to think of it, literature does have stories and poetry in it. In the grades 2 through 3 complexity band, proficiently, that is, they've grouped off these age bands, that just means the 2nd and the 3rd grade. Proficiently, that means they really have to read well, with scaffolding as needed at the high end of the range. What is scaffolding? Well, scaffolding is the buzzword in education circles nowadays. It's taken from the metaphor of scaffolding, which is, as you're building a building, you have scaffolding that goes up that the builders use, and once the building is built, the scaffolding goes away. So it's a metaphor, and it's just used all the time promiscuously. Most people don't even know what it means. It could be translated as teaching. That's what teachers used to do, just teach, not use scaffolding. Or it could even be translated as help. So now I want to give this standard to you in what I think has a common sense translation to it. By the end of the year, read and comprehend literature, including stories and poetry, in the grades 2 through 3 complexity band proficiently, with scaffolding as needed at the high end of the range. Common sense translation. Students in 2nd grade should read and understand more difficult books at the end of the year than at the beginning. They may need help, though. Now, I wish that all the people who talk about these rigorous standards could somehow explain that this is anything other than common sense turned into jargon. But it gets worse, because if you actually look at the books that they're urging students to read in the 2nd and 3rd grade, they're not difficult books. They're not complex books. One of them that is listed is called Tops and Bottoms, which I found on the Amazon site as being a book for 4 through 8-year-olds. And that's one of these books at the high end of the 3rd grade range. I found another book called Cowgirl, Kate, and Coco, which is this monosyllabic story of this girl who has a horse that she wants to take the horse out to do something with, but the horse keeps saying, "I'm hungry, I'm thirsty." And so Kate gives Coco a drink, and then the horse says, "I'm hungry." Just the sort of thing that every 3rd grade boy is just going to jump into and love. Of course not. It's ridiculous. Maybe it would be cute for a 4-year-old, but to be reading that in 3rd grade and calling it rigorous? I don't think so. What's missing in the 3rd grade?